Why did the old man move before anyone else did? That's what people kept asking later, when the videos went viral, when reporters tried to track him down, when the internet called him the ghost medic. But in that moment, inside Terminal C of Dallas, Fort Worth Airport, there were no cameras, no interviews, no stories. Just a hum of ordinary life, and a man who had stopped being ordinary long ago. Robert Chen sat quietly near Gate 42, duffel bag resting by his boots. His ticket said San Diego, 3:15 p.m., but he hadn't looked at it in an hour. The airport noise washed around him, rolling suitcases, coffee orders shouted, a child crying 3 rows away, and he barely heard it. He'd learned, over years in war zones and waiting rooms, how to turn down the world until only the important sounds came through. He looked like any other elderly passenger, someone you'd pass without a glance. A faded navy jacket, a face marked by years and sun, hair gone to silver, hands that shook slightly when he reached for his coffee. But under those hands were scars that didn't fade with time, the kind that remind you every morning what you've seen, and every night what you can't forget. He adjusted his collar, eyes scanning the crowd with that instinct he could never turn off. Situational awareness, muscle memory. He'd been out of the service for nearly 2 decades, but the habits hadn't left him. They never did. Once you'd spent your life watching for danger, you didn't stop just because people stopped saluting you. Across from him, a group of young men in polos were laughing about something on their phones. A mother was struggling with a stroller. A businessman barked into his headset. Life, loud and self-absorbed. And then, something different. It was small at first, a shift in rhythm. The sound of hurried footsteps turning uneven. A figure moving through the security lane, his gait off balance. Robert noticed before anyone else did. The young man wore a hoodie despite the Texas heat. His right hand pressed hard against his side. His jaw clenched. Every movement screamed one thing: pain. Robert's heartbeat slowed. His body remembered the pattern even if his mind hadn't caught up. The walk of a wounded man trying to stay upright. The effort in the shoulders. The focus in the eyes, pretending everything was fine until it was. The young man made it 3 more steps before his knees buckled. He collapsed just past the metal detector, a sound like a heavy bag hitting the floor. Gasps rippled through the terminal. A TSA agent shouted. A woman screamed. People froze, that strange paralysis that comes when the world turns suddenly wrong. Robert was already moving. He didn't think, he didn't analyze. The old wiring kicked in, clean and automatic. He was out of his chair, duffel forgotten, coffee spilling to the floor. The years fell away with each step. 60, 70, 80 years old, none of it mattered. Only training, only instinct. He dropped to his knees beside the fallen man. "Easy, son," he said quietly, voice firm but calm. "You're okay, stay with me." A TSA agent reached for him. "Sir, please step back, paramedics are." 10 minutes out, Robert cut him off. "He doesn't have 10. He pulled back the hoodie. That's when he saw it, a patch of deep red spreading fast, soaking through the young man's shirt. Not surface bleeding, internal. Right side, lower ribs, a gunshot wound likely through and through. For half a breath, the whole terminal seemed to vanish. Robert wasn't in an airport anymore. He was 23 again, crouched behind a Humvee in desert sand, hearing his friend gasp for air after shrapnel tore through his side. The same look, the same sound, the same helpless fight to breathe. He pressed his jacket against the wound. Hard, deliberate pressure. Not too much, enough to stop the flow, not to crush the tissue. His hands didn't shake now. They remembered every motion. "Hey," Robert murmured, "what's your name, sailor?" The young man's lips trembled. "Mitchell Jason, petty officer, second class." His breath hitched and his pupils rolled slightly. "Navy SEAL." Robert nodded once, almost to himself. "SEAL, huh? You picked a rough vacation spot." Mitchell tried to smile, failed. "Yemen, extraction op. Took a hit, medic patched me up, told me to fly to Naval Medical." His voice cracked. Didn't make it that far. Don't talk, Robert said softly. Save your breath, you've done enough getting here. He looked up. I need a belt, he shouted. A belt or cord, something to make a bandage, and water, 2 bottles now. For a second no one moved. Then 3 passengers scrambled. A man threw his belt. A woman tossed her scarf. Another slid over bottled water from her carry-on. Robert caught each item without looking away from the wound. The scarf became padding, the belt, a pressure bandage. He elevated Mitchell's legs using nearby duffel bags. Years fell away. It was Vietnam again. Desert storm, bodies on stretchers, orders shouted through static, hands soaked in blood. The memories didn't haunt him now, they guided him. They reminded him why he'd survived when others hadn't. The TSA agent crouched beside him, wide-eyed. Do you know what you're doing? Robert didn't look up. I was a corpsman, he said. 15 years, 2 wars, senior chief. We didn't just know what to do, we were what to do. The bleeding slowed. Mitchell's breathing steadied, shallow but steady. His eyelids fluttered open again. You sound like my dad. Robert smiled faintly. Your dad teach you to stop bleeding with a belt. A weak chuckle escaped the young man. He taught me not to quit. Smart man. Robert tightened the bandage. Hold on to that. Minutes passed. The terminal had grown silent except for the hum of air conditioning and faint murmurs. Dozens of travelers stood frozen, watching a stranger keep another stranger alive. Phones were out. Some filmed. Others prayed. The world had stopped moving just long enough to remember what humanity looked like. Robert leaned closer. Listen, Mitchell, he said softly. You made it through Yemen. You're not checking out in a Texas airport. That's not how your story ends. Mitchell's lips twitched. Senior Chief, I should have saluted. Save your strength, sailor. That small, broken grin stayed on Mitchell's face as the sirens finally echoed from the far corridor, paramedics pushing a stretcher through the crowd. Robert briefed them before they could ask. Quick, clipped sentences. Entry wound, right lateral torso, exit under the ribcage. I applied compression, elevated legs, minimal fluid loss now. Pulse weak but stabilizing. He needs fluids and oxygen immediately. One of the EMTs glanced up, eyebrows raised in respect. You a doctor, sir? Just an old corpsman, Robert replied. Different uniform, same job. They worked efficiently, transferring Mitchell onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, the young SEAL grabbed Robert's wrist, surprisingly strong for someone who'd lost so much blood. Thank you, he rasped. Why'd you? Robert leaned closer, squeezing his hand. Because that's what corpsmen do. We take care of our sailors, always have, always will. The EMTs wheeled Mitchell away, disappearing behind the security gate. For a long second the crowd stood silent. Then applause. Spontaneous, raw, genuine, strangers clapping through tears. Robert didn't react. He just sat back down on the bench, jacket blood-soaked, hands trembling now that the adrenaline was gone. The noise returned, boarding calls, footsteps, phones buzzing, but none of it touched him. He stared at his shaking hands, whispering almost to himself, old habits never really die. An airport staffer approached timidly. Sir, that was incredible. Can we get your name? The press is going to. No need, Robert said, his voice steady again. Just tell them an old corpsman did what he was trained to do. But sir, you saved that man's life. Robert's eyes drifted toward where Mitchell had been wheeled away. He saved himself getting here. I just helped him finish the journey. The worker hesitated. At least let me buy you another coffee. Robert shook his head. No thanks. Too much caffeine makes my hands shake. A dry smile touched his lips. Can't have that next time someone bleeds out at gate 42. As the employee walked away, Robert leaned back and closed his eyes. The cheering had stopped, but something else filled the silence, a memory. The sound of ocean waves against a carrier deck, the laughter of sailors, the radio crackle before dawn. It all came rushing back, warm and heavy. He'd spent years thinking his purpose ended when the uniform came off. But sitting there, covered in someone else's blood, he realized something profound: the mission never truly ends. It just changes shape. Sometimes it waits quietly inside you until the moment you're called again. He exhaled slowly, a tired smile ghosting his lips. "Guess I'm still on duty," he murmured. And somewhere down the corridor, paramedics shouted over the roar of airport engines, fighting to save a young man who now had a second chance, because an old sailor refused to stop being what he was trained to be. When Jason Mitchell opened his eyes, he didn't know where he was. The light above him was white, too white, like the kind you only see in hospitals or operating rooms. His throat burned, his ribs ached, and a faint beeping beside his head counted out his heartbeat like a metronome. For a long moment he didn't move, just listened. Air conditioning hum, shoes squeaking on tile, the faint smell of antiseptic. He was safe, that much he could tell, but his body still expected gunfire, still braced for the sound of helicopters and sand whipping through metal. He tried to move his arm, pain shot through his torso. "Easy there, sailor," a calm voice said. He turned his head slowly. A woman in scrubs stood at the foot of his bed, smiling softly. Her badge read Naval Medical Center, San Diego. "You're awake," she said. "That's good news. You've been out for a while." "How long?" His voice was gravel. 3 days. You came in critical, but you're stable now." Mitchell blinked hard, trying to piece together the fragments. Airport, pain, blood, an old man's face, steady hands pressing on his ribs. "Where's the man who helped me?" he asked, voice cracking. "Older guy, Asian, said his name was Robert." The nurse smiled. "He called 2 days ago, wanted to check on you. Said you'd understand if I told you this. Corpsmen don't quit." Mitchell felt a strange lump in his throat. "That's him." She adjusted his IV. "Said he'd stop by when you're strong enough to sit up. You're lucky he was there, Jason. The doctor said his field care saved your life." Lucky. That word echoed strangely in his mind. He'd been in Yemen 48 hours earlier. Half his unit hadn't made it out. The rest scattered through medevac routes and temporary postings. And now, somehow, he was here alive, because an old stranger had refused to walk away. When the nurse left, Mitchell stared at the ceiling for a long time. He replayed the airport again and again. The chaos, the crowd, the sound of that voice, steady, unshaken, cutting through the panic. He remembered the pressure on his wound, the instructions barked like orders from a man who didn't need to be told what to do. There was something familiar about it. The tone, the confidence, the warmth underneath the steel. He'd heard that kind of voice before in training, from men who'd seen things no manual could teach. "Senior Chief," I should have saluted. He'd meant it. 2 days later, the door to his hospital room opened quietly. Mitchell turned, expecting a nurse. Instead, there he was. Robert Chen stood in the doorway, dressed in a clean blue button-up jeans and that same weathered face from the terminal. He carried no flowers, no gifts, just a quiet nod. "Permission to enter, sailor." Mitchell grinned weakly. "I think I owe you a few salutes first, Senior Chief." Robert waved it off and stepped closer. "Save your energy. They tell me you're healing." "Yeah," Mitchell said. "Docs say I got lucky." Robert's lips twitched. "You got stubborn, that's what saved you." For a moment, silence settled between them. The kind of silence that isn't awkward, just heavy with unspoken gratitude. "I heard you served," Mitchell said. "Vietnam." "2 tours," Robert replied. "Then the Gulf. Retired as Senior Chief Corpsman. Been out longer than I care to admit." "You still move like you're on active duty." Robert chuckled softly. "Tell that to my knees, they disagree." Mitchell studied him. "Why were you there, at the airport, I mean?" Robert hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the window. "Going home. I try to make the San Diego trip every year. Some buddies from my unit we meet, tell the same stories, laugh at the same lies. He smiled faintly. We call it recon for old ghosts. Mitchell's eyes softened. Sounds like a good mission. Robert shrugged. We do what we can to remember. That's all any of us really do. He turned back. You said you came from Yemen, that operation classified. Mitchell nodded slightly. Mostly. We lost 2 men during exfil, took fire on the way out. Got hit near the ribs, medic patched me quick, told me to move before infection set in. I didn't want to wait for medevac, thought I could tough it out. Robert's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You thought wrong. Mitchell laughed faintly. Guess I did. You're lucky your medic was good, Robert said, and that you made it as far as that terminal. Some people would call that a miracle. I call it training. He pulled up a chair beside the bed. His hands rested calmly on his knees, but Mitchell could see the faint tremor in them, the aftershocks of old adrenaline, maybe age, maybe something deeper. You ever miss it? Mitchell asked quietly. Robert smiled without looking up. Every day, and not a bit of it all at once. He looked at the younger man. You'll know what I mean someday. Hours passed in easy conversation, not about medals or missions, but the in-between things. The taste of MRE coffee, the sound of rain on a hangar roof, the way silence feels heavier in safe zones than it ever did under fire. Robert told stories not as a hero, but as a man trying to remember the small details, the names that faded, the laughter that didn't. When visiting hours ended, he stood slowly, stretching his knees. Get some rest, he said, and eat something that doesn't come out of a vacuum-sealed pouch. Mitchell smiled. You'll come back, right? Robert's answer was simple. We take care of our own. Then he was gone. That night, Mitchell couldn't sleep. He thought of the man who'd saved him, how easily he'd moved through chaos, how calm his hands had been. There was something about Robert that didn't fit the story of an aging retiree. Something deeper, something still alive inside him. Mitchell pulled out his phone, ignoring the nurse's warning to rest. He typed Senior Chief Robert Chen into the search bar. Hundreds of results, old photos, mentions in veteran forums, obituaries of men who'd served under him, all calling him the same thing, Doc Chen. He scrolled through comments. Saved my leg in '91. Best damn medic I ever knew. He patched me up in Desert Storm when everyone else thought I was gone. Doc Chen doesn't just save you, he teaches you how to live again. Mitchell swallowed hard. The man sitting beside his bed had been legend, and he'd never said a word about it. The next morning, Robert returned. This time Mitchell was waiting upright, IV stand beside him. You should be lying down, Robert said with a smirk. Yeah, well, Mitchell replied. I had a feeling you'd show up again. Didn't want to look weak. Robert chuckled. Too late. You already bled out on an airport floor. They both laughed, the kind of laugh soldiers share when they've both seen too much. Mitchell gestured to the chair. Sit, I got questions. Robert raised an eyebrow. Questions or debrief? Both. They talked for over an hour. Mitchell asked about corpsman life, about the difference between saving lives in the field and living with the memories afterward. Robert answered every question with honesty, never dramatizing, never simplifying. The truth is, he said, you never stop being what you were trained to be. You just wait for the world to need it again. And when that moment comes, you don't think, you act. Mitchell nodded slowly. Guess you proved that. Robert smiled. Guess you reminded me why it mattered. As visiting hours ended again, Robert stood to leave. Before I go, he said, reaching into his pocket, something I want you to have. He placed a small object in Mitchell's hand, a dull metal coin, worn smooth by time. It was a challenge coin, marked 3rd Medical Battalion. Robert's name was etched on the back. Mitchell looked at it, eyes wide. This is yours. Was, Robert said. Now it's ours. Corpsmen and SEALs, same bloodline. When you're healed, pass it on to someone who needs it more than you. That's how we keep the chain alive. Mitchell stared at the coin, the weight of it far heavier than metal. Thank you, Senior Chief, he whispered. Robert nodded once, his voice soft but steady. Don't thank me, son. Just live a life worth saving. That night, as the hallway lights dimmed and the machines hummed in rhythm, Mitchell held the coin in his palm. He realized something powerful. The man who saved him hadn't just stopped his bleeding. He'd given him something harder to find in this world. A reason to keep going. And somewhere across the city, Robert Chen sat alone in a quiet apartment, the sound of ocean waves faint through the open window. His jacket, still stained faintly with blood, hung on the back of a chair. He ran his thumb across the old Navy patch, whispering words no one else could hear. Once a corpsman, always a corpsman. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence fold over him, not empty, but earned. Some debts aren't written on paper. They live in silence, in the space between two people who have both seen the edge and stepped back. 3 weeks had passed since the airport. Jason Mitchell's wounds were healing faster than doctors expected, though the nightmares were. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced he was back in that alley in Yemen, the smell of gunpowder and diesel in the air. Other nights, he dreamed of the airport, of a stranger's voice telling him, "You're not checking out in a Texas airport." That voice never left him. He called it the anchor, something that kept him grounded when his mind wanted to drift. Robert Chen hadn't visited in 10 days, but Mitchell didn't take it personally. The man had done enough. He owed him his life. Still, part of him wished he'd appear again, quiet, unannounced, like last time. He didn't expect the visit to come from someone else. It was early morning. The hospital hallway buzzed faintly with nurses changing shifts. A tall man in a crisp Navy uniform stepped into Mitchell's room, his cap tucked under one arm. His face was sharp, his movements deliberate. "Petty Officer Mitchell." "Yes, sir." "I'm Commander Briggs, Naval Liaison Office." He set a folder on the table. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course." Briggs took the chair beside the bed. His tone was professional, but carried an undercurrent of something else, curiosity, maybe respect. "I'm here about your incident in Dallas," he began. "Specifically about the man who treated you." "Senior Chief Robert Chen," Mitchell said quickly. "He saved my life." Briggs nodded. "Yes, we're aware. That video reached just about every veteran forum in the country before the Navy's public affairs team could breathe. We've had requests, senators, veterans groups, even the Secretary's office, all asking who this man is." Mitchell frowned. "You didn't know about him?" "Oh, we knew," Briggs said softly. "We just didn't know he was still active." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Active?" Briggs opened the folder and slid out an old personnel file. The photo showed a much younger Robert, same eyes, same calm presence, standing beside a group of SEALs on a dusty tarmac. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Robert Chen," Briggs read. "Corpsman, 3rd Medical Battalion, attached to SEAL Team 2, later Team 5. Vietnam, Desert Storm, Somalia, and several classified operations we can't even unseal yet." Mitchell studied the photo. He never mentioned any of that. "He wouldn't," Briggs said. "Chen was the kind of man who didn't talk about what he did. But I can tell you this, his name, in more after-action reports than most officers ever see in a career. Men alive today because of him. Medals recommended. Most declined." "Declined?" Briggs nodded. "He didn't want recognition, said, the medal belongs to the one who didn't make it home." Silence. Mitchell stared down at the sheet, the lines of Robert's record swimming before his eyes. It wasn't just impressive, it was staggering. A lifetime of service. hidden behind the quiet of a man who still took the bus to the airport like anyone else. "Why are you telling me this?" Mitchell asked finally. "Because," Briggs said, leaning back, "the Department of the Navy intends to correct something. Senior Chief Chen was nominated for the Navy Cross 30 years ago. The paperwork was lost during a transfer, the event classified. It's been sitting in limbo ever since." Mitchell's eyes widened. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we plan to honor him properly. And since you're the one he saved, Command wants you to present it." Mitchell sat there stunned. "Me?" Briggs smiled faintly. "You're his living proof, that's enough." That evening, Mitchell couldn't sleep. He stared at the coin Robert had given him, turning it over and over, the metal warm from his hand. A medal 30 years late, a man who never asked for it. He couldn't stop thinking about what Briggs said. He didn't want recognition. Maybe that's why Robert disappeared again. The next morning, Mitchell asked for discharge permission. The doctor hesitated, then agreed. His wounds were healing, his vitals strong. By noon, Mitchell was outside, the San Diego sun on his face, a light breeze carrying salt from the bay. He'd spent years in deserts, jungles, and broken cities, but nothing felt as foreign as peace. He called the number Robert had left on a hospital note. No answer. He tried again the next day, still nothing. So he took a cab. The address led to a quiet street near the harbor, small houses with peeling paint and wind chimes that never stopped moving. Robert's truck sat in the driveway, rust along the wheel wells, license plate faded. Mitchell knocked once. No response. He was about to leave when the door opened. Robert stood there, wearing an old Navy sweatshirt and holding a mug of tea. He looked surprised, but only slightly. "You're walking," he said. "Trying to." Robert stepped aside. "Then you're ahead of most people I know. Come in." The inside was simple, a single couch, books stacked on the floor, pictures of Navy crews on the wall. One photo caught Mitchell's eye, a much younger Robert standing beside a SEAL team. One of the men in the photo was his own father. Mitchell froze. Robert noticed. "You recognize someone." Mitchell pointed. "That's my dad." Robert's eyes softened. "James Mitchell, good man, damn good. He was the team leader on our Somalia run. He's the reason I made it home." Mitchell sank onto the couch. "You knew him." Robert sat across from him. "Better than most. Your dad saved my life once. Looks like I finally paid him back." The room went quiet. For a long moment, Mitchell didn't speak. Then he whispered, "He died when I was 14, training accident. I never got to ask him about that deployment." Robert's voice was gentle. "He talked about you all the time, said you'd grow into something stronger than he ever was." Mitchell looked away, blinking hard. "Guess he overestimated me." "No," Robert said firmly. "He knew what you were made of. That's why you're still here." For the next hour they talked not about war, but about father's regrets and the strange way life folds back on itself. Mitchell told Robert about the upcoming medal ceremony. "They want me to present it," he said. "You deserve it, Senior Chief." Robert shook his head slowly. "No, I don't." "Sir." "I mean it," Robert interrupted. "The men who earned that medal aren't breathing. I'm just the one who got lucky." Mitchell leaned forward. "That's not luck, that's service." Robert looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Service doesn't mean much when the faces fade, when you can't remember who you saved and who you couldn't." He stood, walking to the window, staring at the ocean. "Every corpsman carries ghosts, Jason. You just learn to live with them. Some days they're quiet. Some days they sit right next to you at breakfast." Mitchell followed his gaze. "What if remembering them is what keeps you human?" Robert turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then I guess I'll stay human a little longer." Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the horizon gold. The two men stood side by side, silent, the ocean wind pushing through the open door. "You coming to the ceremony?" Mitchell asked quietly. Robert hesitated. "Maybe. They want to honor you." Robert's eyes stayed on the sea. "You can't honor what isn't finished." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Just watched the waves, whispering something to himself. Mitchell couldn't catch all of it, but he heard the last words clear as day. "Not until they're all home." That night Robert Chen sat alone again, the metal notice lying unopened on his table. He reached for his old jacket, the one stained from the airport, and folded it carefully over the back of the chair. Then he stared at the photograph of his old team, his hand trembling as it touched the glass. There were 8 men in the picture. Only one was still alive. He whispered their names like a prayer, one by one, as the wind moved through the open window. The city outside kept moving, unaware that one of its quiet heroes still sat awake, not for glory, not for guilt, but for memory. The morning of the ceremony arrived wrapped in salt air and sunlight. San Diego's naval base gleamed like polished steel white uniforms, flags snapping against the wind, brass buttons shining under the California sky. For most, it was a day of celebration. For Robert Chen, it felt like standing in front of a firing line. He hadn't wanted to come. The invitation had sat unopened for days until Mitchell showed up on his porch again, wearing his dress blues, still walking carefully on his healing side. "You saved my life," he'd said simply. "Let me return the favor, just show up." So Robert came, not for the medal, not for the attention, but because he'd learned long ago that sometimes showing up was its own kind of courage. As he stepped onto the base grounds, his eyes swept over rows of uniforms, young and sharp, faces full of energy, purpose, the kind of faces that believed in clear lines between right and wrong. He remembered when he used to believe that too. Mitchell met him near the ceremony stage, his cap tucked under his arm. "You made it, Senior Chief. Don't sound so surprised. I half expected you to disappear like last time." Robert gave a faint smile, thought about it. They stood in silence, watching the crowd gather, sailors, officers, veterans, a few civilians with cameras. Somewhere near the front sat Commander Briggs, clipboard in hand, running logistics. Robert's heart thudded slow but heavy. He wasn't nervous about standing in front of people. He'd faced worse. But this felt different. It wasn't a battlefield. It was memory itself calling him forward. He ran his fingers across the worn fabric of his jacket. The bloodstains from the airport had faded, but he could still feel them, reminders that saving lives was never a single act. It was a lifetime of them, each one cutting a little deeper. Mitchell noticed his quiet drift. "You okay?" Robert nodded, eyes on the horizon, just thinking about old friends. "Were they from the mission the medals for?" Robert didn't answer immediately, then softly, "Yeah." Mitchell hesitated. "What happened out there?" Robert's gaze hardened slightly. "You sure you want to know?" "I think I need to." They moved away from the crowd, down a quiet stretch near the water where the sound of gulls filled the space between them. Robert took a long breath. It was 91, Somalia, recon and medical support for Team 5. Mission was supposed to be clean extraction of civilians caught between militia lines, but intel was bad. We walked into a trap. His voice stayed steady, but Mitchell could hear the edges roughen, the wear of memory grinding against restraint. "They hit us with RPGs first, dust everywhere, couldn't see a damn thing. One of our men, your father, led the counter, held them off long enough for me to get the wounded out. He was hit trying to pull me behind cover." Robert's jaw tightened. "We called for evac. They said 5 minutes, it took 30. Mitchell stood still, barely breathing. "When the bird finally came, I loaded the last man and realized," Robert's voice faltered. "There was no room left. I was supposed to stay behind, But your father, he shoved me in, told me, "Doc, you still got work to do." Then he shut the door. The words hung in the air like shrapnel. "He died on the ground holding off fire so the rest of us could live," Robert said quietly. "They pinned the operation a success, recommended me for the cross, but it wasn't my medal, it was his." Mitchell swallowed hard. "That's why you never accepted it." Robert nodded slowly. "It didn't feel right, never will." They stood there side by side, the wind sharp with salt and grief. Mitchell looked at him, voice rough. "He'd have said you earned it." Robert gave a faint smile. "He'd have said stop being dramatic and clean your weapon." That made them both laugh soft, broken but real. The ceremony began an hour later. Rows of uniforms faced the stage, flags rippling. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers, reading citations, names, honors. Cameras flashed, applause rolled. But to Robert, it all sounded distant, like hearing a conversation underwater. He sat in the front row, cap in hand, back straight out of habit. When his name was called, he stood slowly. The applause came before the words, thunderous, heartfelt, a sea of hands clapping for a man they barely knew. Mitchell rose beside him, his dress blues immaculate, the Navy cross glinting in his gloved hands. As Robert climbed the steps, something shifted inside him. He wasn't seeing the ceremony anymore, he was seeing the faces. The men from the photo, the ones who never got to grow old, never got to sit in folding chairs under clear skies. The announcer's voice faded into the background. "For extraordinary heroism in action while serving as Hospital Corpsman Senior Chief Petty Officer, 3rd Medical Battalion, attached to SEAL Team 5, during operations in Somalia." Each word felt heavier than the last. Mitchell turned toward him, holding out the medal. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Senior Chief Chen, on behalf of the United States Navy, it's my honor." "Wait," Robert said quietly. The crowd fell silent. Even the gulls seemed to stop. Robert looked down at the medal, then at Mitchell, then out across the gathered faces. "I appreciate the gesture," he began, voice calm, deep. "But this medal, it doesn't belong to me." Whispers rippled through the crowd. He continued, his tone unwavering. "It belongs to the men who didn't make it home, to the ones who bought our silence with their last breath, to those who stood when everyone else fell back." He looked toward the sky, squinting against the sunlight. "Your records might say I earned it, but the truth is I just survived it." A hush fell over the entire base. Then Robert reached for the microphone, his hand steady now. "I'll accept this today, not as mine, but in their name, because memory's the only thing stronger than time." Mitchell's throat tightened. He pinned the medal to Robert's chest anyway, eyes wet. "Then let's make sure they're remembered." Robert nodded once, the faintest smile ghosting across his face. "That's the mission, sailor." After the ceremony, no one rushed him. No reporters swarmed. The crowd seemed to understand that some honors aren't meant to be celebrated loudly. They're meant to be carried. Robert walked alone toward the pier, the wind lifting his hair, the medal glinting once before settling flat against his chest. He leaned on the rail, staring out at the waves, each crash echoing the heartbeat he'd almost forgotten he still had. Mitchell joined him quietly. "Wasn't easy up there," he said softly. Robert smirked. "Never is." "You ever think about writing your story down?" Robert chuckled. "I've written enough field reports to last 2 lifetimes. Stories like mine don't belong in books." "Then where do they belong?" He looked at him, eyes tired but bright. "In the people we save." Mitchell fell silent. There was something almost sacred about that line, something that belonged in the kind of voiceover that made you pause halfway through a video and just feel. They stood that way for a long time, 2 men from different generations, joined by the same oath. When the sun began to sink, Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He handed it to Mitchell. "What's this?" Something I started years ago, never finished, maybe you can. Mitchell unfolded it carefully. It was a letter half written, the ink faded. To the families of the men who didn't come home. He looked up, you never sent it. Robert shook his head, didn't have the right words. Mitchell smiled faintly, maybe now we can find them together. Robert didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth lifted just enough. The sun bled orange across the water, light glinting off the metal he didn't want but accepted anyway. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. But it was something close. That night, long after the crowd had gone, Robert sat alone on the pier, the folded letter resting beside him. He took the medal off his chest, laid it next to the letter, and whispered, "For you boys always was." Then he looked out across the dark water. The wind carried his words out to sea, toward ghosts, toward memory, toward every promise made under fire that he'd never stopped keeping. Behind him, Mitchell watched silently from a distance, understanding something that didn't need to be said. Sometimes heroes don't move on, they stand guard. It started with a phone call. Robert had been asleep in his recliner, the TV flickering faint blue against the walls of his small living room. A half-empty mug of tea sat beside him, the air still carrying the faint tang of salt and oil from the bay outside. The ring cut through the silence like a shot. He blinked awake, rubbed his eyes, and reached for the phone. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated, then answered. "Jen." The voice on the other end was hurried, low. "Senior Chief, it's Mitchell." Robert sat up straighter. "Jason, what's wrong?" There was a pause filled with background noise, movement, maybe wind. Then Mitchell's voice again, strained. "One of my teammates, Petty Officer Cole Ramirez, he's in trouble. Stateside training exercise went bad. I'm at Balboa Hospital right now. He's critical. They're saying internal bleeding, punctured lung." Robert's grip on the phone tightened. "You with him?" "Yes, sir. They're doing everything they can," but his voice cracked. "He's not responding." Robert exhaled slowly. "What do the surgeons say?" "They're waiting on a specialist, but he's an hour out. Senior Chief, Cole doesn't have an hour." Robert didn't think twice. "Send me the address." "Sir, you don't have to." "Jason," Robert interrupted, voice steady. "You called because you already knew I would." He hung up, grabbed his jacket, the same one still marked faintly from the airport, and stepped into the night. The drive to Balboa Naval Hospital was quiet except for the hum of tires and the low growl of the old truck's engine. Streetlights flashed by like slow-moving tracers. Robert's thoughts flickered with them, not panic, not fear, just that cold, sharp focus that had defined his entire career. It wasn't about heroics. It was about time, and time was something you either beat or buried you. He parked near the emergency entrance, ignoring the signs, and strode through the doors. The nurse at the desk looked up, startled by the presence of an old man in a faded navy jacket moving with purpose. "Sir, visiting hours are over." "Senior Chief Robert Chen," he said calmly, sliding his old ID across the counter. "Medical Corps, retired. I'm here for Petty Officer Ramirez, Trauma Unit." The nurse hesitated, caught off guard by the tone, firm but not aggressive, like someone used to being obeyed for the right reasons. "One moment, sir." Moments later, she waved him through. Inside the trauma unit was chaos, controlled, but chaos all the same. Nurses rushing, machines beeping, the faint hiss of oxygen. Mitchell was there, still in partial uniform, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Senior Chief," he breathed, relief flooding his face. Robert nodded once. "Where is he?" Mitchell pointed toward the glass partition. Inside, a young man lay pale and still, chest rising unevenly beneath tubes and sensors. The monitor beside him showed erratic vitals. Robert stepped closer, scanning the readings like he'd never left the field. His mind ran through possibilities: internal hemorrhage, chest collapse, oxygen failure. What happened? Training op out in the desert, Mitchell said. Vehicle flipped. He took a hit to the ribs, piece of metal punctured through. Anyone relieve the pressure? They tried. He flatlined once. Robert's jaw clenched. Get me the attending. A young doctor hurried over, early 30s, sleeves rolled, eyes tired. Sir, I'm Dr. Harlan, you must be. Chen, Robert said shortly. Corpsman retired, what's your plan? Waiting on thoracic surgery. He's bleeding into his lung cavity. We've stabilized for now. For now, Robert echoed. You're losing him. Harlan frowned. Sir, I appreciate your service, but this is a restricted. Robert's voice cut through the noise. You have a scalpel, suction, and a chest tube. Yes, but... Then get me in there. The doctor hesitated, caught between protocol and instinct. The authority in Robert's tone didn't sound like suggestion. It sounded like history, the kind of command that came from someone who'd saved more lives than textbooks ever could. Finally, Harlan nodded. Fine, but you assist, I lead. Robert's lips twitched. That's how it's supposed to be. Inside the trauma bay, the air smelled of antiseptic and adrenaline. Robert scrubbed in beside the young doctor, steadying his breathing. His hands didn't shake anymore. The tremors that plagued him in quiet moments always vanished when there was work to do. They worked quickly. Robert's voice remained low, precise. Clamp there, pressure here. Good, now clear the airway. Mitchell watched from behind the glass. Every nerve in his body pulled taut. Then a cough, a sputter. The monitor steadied. Ramirez's chest began to rise normally. Harlan exhaled. Vitals stabilizing. You were right about the pressure. Robert nodded once, eyes fixed on the monitor. Sometimes the old ways still work. The doctor gave a small, genuine smile. You saved him, Senior Chief. Robert shook his head. We saved him. Outside, Mitchell was waiting. How bad? He asked. He'll make it, Robert said quietly. You got him here just in time. Mitchell looked down, jaw tight. I froze for a second out there when it happened. My training just stopped. It was like everything I learned went blank. If I'd moved faster. Robert put a hand on his shoulder. Don't do that. Do what? Blame yourself for being human. Mitchell blinked hard. You never froze. Robert gave a faint, almost sad smile. Every man freezes. Some of us just move through it quicker. They stood there in silence for a while, watching through the glass as nurses adjusted Ramirez's IV. Then Robert said softly, You did good, son. The hardest part of this job isn't saving someone's life. It's living with the times you can't. Mitchell nodded, eyes wet. I don't know how you carried it all these years. Robert's gaze drifted toward the floor. You don't carry it. You let it live with you. Eventually, it stops feeling like a weight and starts feeling like company. Mitchell swallowed hard. That's heavy. Robert's eyes softened. So is the truth. Hours later, when Ramirez was out of surgery, Robert sat in the waiting room, staring out the window at the city lights. Mitchell returned with 2 coffees. Here. Robert accepted it. Thanks, didn't realize it was still night. It's almost morning, Mitchell said. You've been here for 6 hours. Robert smiled faintly. Guess I'm on duty again. Mitchell chuckled. You never went off. They sat quietly, sipping in the silence. After a while, Mitchell said, When you were in Somalia, did you ever think you'd be doing this again at your age? Robert didn't look up. Didn't think I'd live long enough to find out. He turned slightly. But that's the thing about service, Jason. You don't retire from it, you just stop getting paid. Mitchell laughed softly. That's one way to put it. Robert's voice grew quieter. The oath doesn't end. Not really. You just wait for the world to remind you why you took it. By dawn, Ramirez was stable. The nurses dimmed the lights, the noise faded, and the hospital finally settled into the fragile calm that comes after chaos. Mitchell was half asleep in his chair, when he heard Robert's voice again. "Jason." He looked up. Robert stood by the door, jacket in hand. The early light through the blinds cut across his face, half shadow, half glow. "Where are you going?" Mitchell asked. "Home," Robert said, "or what passes for it. You could stay. The guys would want to see you." Robert smiled. Let him wake up first. He deserves to open his eyes to a familiar face, not an old ghost. Mitchell stood slowly. "You're not a ghost, Senior Chief." Robert tilted his head. "Then why do I feel like one sometimes?" Mitchell stepped forward. "Because you never stopped walking the line, but that's not a curse. That's who you are." Robert's smile deepened, soft and proud. "You'll do fine, Jason. Just remember, being strong doesn't mean you don't feel it. It means you do, and you keep moving anyway." He turned toward the hallway. "Senior Chief," Mitchell called after him, "you ever regretted the service?" Robert paused in the doorway. "Every day I didn't save someone, and none of the days I did." Then he was gone just like that. Quiet, no goodbye, no ceremony. Just the sound of old boots on linoleum fatting down the hall. That evening, Mitchell went to the hospital chapel. It was empty except for the hum of a single light and a small book of names on the altar, the hospital's memorial log. He flipped it open, scanning pages filled with handwriting. Dates, units, ranks. Then on a small scrap tucked inside, he found a note. No signature, just 4 words in careful handwriting. "Not until they're all home." He smiled, realizing who'd left it. Outside, the wind off the Pacific rattled the chapel door, gentle, almost like a salute. Somewhere across the city, Robert Chen drove back to his small house by the harbor. He parked, stepped out, and stood for a long while looking at the water. The medal from the ceremony hung on a nail above his kitchen table. The edges gleamed faintly in the moonlight. He didn't touch it. He just looked, and for the first time in years it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Not for the missions, not for the medals, but for the quiet moments when no one else was watching, when an old corpsman answered the call anyway. The first sign came on a quiet morning, the kind of morning where everything felt too still. Robert Chen had been sitting at his kitchen table, newspaper folded, coffee cooling beside him. The bay outside shimmered under soft gray light, the kind of calm that usually brought him peace. But that day, something was off. He'd reached for his mug and realized his fingers weren't closing right. A tremor, sharper than before, ran through his hand. His chest felt tight, not pain exactly, but pressure. He sat there, breathing slow, counting like he used to count heartbeats in the field. 1, 2, 3, steady it down. It passed in under a minute, but it left a silence behind, the kind of silence that carried warning. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because men like Robert didn't rush to doctors. They waited until something truly broke. Days passed. The tremor faded, then returned. Nights grew restless. Sleep came in short bursts, sometimes interrupted by dreams of places long gone, sometimes by nothing at all. He spent more time by the water, watching ships fade into the horizon, each one stirring something old inside him. A strange mixture of pride and regret, like watching your own reflection drift away. Then one afternoon, a knock came at his door. He opened it to find Commander Briggs again, this time not in dress uniform but a plain jacket, sleeves rolled, a man in motion. "Senior Chief," Briggs said, smiling faintly, "hope I'm not intruding." "You are," Robert replied, stepping aside anyway. "Coffee." "Please." Inside, Briggs set a folder on the table thicker than last time. "You're still working?" Robert asked. "Always," Briggs said with a tired grin. "We've got a situation, and I think your expertise might help." Robert raised an eyebrow. "I'm retired, Commander, in case the Navy forgot." Briggs nodded. "Believe me, we know, but this isn't about orders, it's about guidance." He slid a photo across the table. A group of young SEALs, all familiar faces to Robert by now. Mitchell among them, and beside him, a red circle drawn around a woman, Lieutenant Sarah Connors. She's leading a medevac team out of Coronado, Briggs explained. They're preparing for a high-risk extraction drill overseas. Problem is, her field medic resigned last week. Command wants someone to consult, review her emergency protocols, field methods, casualty procedures. The team requested you. Robert frowned. They don't need a relic like me. Actually, Briggs said softly, they asked for you specifically. Mitchell did. Robert's eyes lingered on the photo, the young lieutenant's confident face, the same steel he'd once seen in his own reflection. He exhaled slowly. I can take a look. The training facility at Coronado hadn't changed much. Same ocean wind, same grit under the boots, the hum of helicopters on standby. As Robert walked across the tarmac, younger sailors turned to look. Not mockery, curiosity. The kind reserved for someone whose reputation whispered louder than his presence. Mitchell was waiting near the hangar, smile wide. Senior Chief, thought you might ghost us again. Robert gave a soft snort. You don't get rid of me that easy. He gestured toward the team. So this is your unit? Yeah, Mitchell said. Lieutenant Connors, this is the man who could probably patch up God if you gave him duct tape. Sarah Connors turned, extending a hand. She was mid-30s, sharp eyes, calm voice, a presence that filled the space quietly but completely. Senior Chief Chen, she said, an honor, sir. He shook her hand firmly. Ma'am, I stopped being sir a long time ago. Call me Robert. Only if you call me Sarah. He smiled faintly. Fair deal. For the next few days, Robert shadowed their training. He watched them run drills, helicopter insertions, simulated extractions, emergency triage. The team was good. Too good, maybe. Fast hands, confident moves. But confidence could be dangerous when it came without the weight of history. During one drill, a mock casualty went into shock. The team's medic hesitated, waiting for orders. Robert stepped forward. Don't think, move, he said sharply. Shock doesn't wait for a chain of command. The young man blinked, startled, then followed orders. When the drill ended, Robert gathered them in a circle. You did well, he said, voice calm but cutting through the wind. But remember, field medicine isn't about heroics. It's about timing. You can lose a man in 30 seconds if you waste 5 thinking. They nodded, absorbing every word. Sarah stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. You still teach like you're in the field. Robert smiled faintly. That's the only way I know how. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Sarah approached him by the pier. You don't talk much about yourself, she said. He looked at her, not much to tell. That's never true with men like you. Robert chuckled. Men like me are just ghosts with good posture. She smiled at that, but her tone softened. You still feel responsible for the ones you lost, don't you? He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Sarah nodded slowly. My father was a pilot, Vietnam. He used to say guilt's just love you can't give anymore. Robert's gaze drifted to the horizon. Maybe that's why it never leaves. They stood there, watching the sun sink below the waves, 2 soldiers from different eras, bound by the same ache. That night back home, Robert's chest tightened again, harder this time. He gripped the edge of the counter, breathing shallow. For a second, the room spun. He managed to steady himself, waiting for the dizziness to pass. When it finally did, sweat covered his neck. He sat down, trembling not from fear but frustration. Old bodies were traitors. They quit long before the mind did. He looked at the old medal on the wall. Its surface caught the moonlight like an accusation. The next morning, Mitchell found him sitting alone in the hangar, staring at the medevac helicopter. Senior Chief. Robert didn't turn. Funny thing about flying birds, he said quietly. They always take off before you're ready." "You okay?" Mitchell asked. Robert smiled faintly. "Getting old isn't the hard part. It's realizing the world keeps spinning without you." Mitchell crouched beside him. "That's not true. We're spinning because of you." Robert looked at him, really looked, and saw in Mitchell's eyes the reflection of every man he'd ever trained, every life he'd ever touched. He nodded slowly. "You're ready, Jason, more than you think." Later that day, Sarah's team ran their final simulation, a full-scale rescue drill. Halfway through, their mock evac helicopter suffered a simulated failure, forcing a ground triage scenario. The medic panicked again. Robert barked orders instinctively. "Seal the wound, stabilize airway, move." They did, crisp, focused, efficient. When it ended, Sarah walked over, sweat glistening on her brow. "We passed," she said, smiling. Robert nodded. "You didn't need me. That's how I know you're ready." As the team dispersed, Sarah handed him a sealed envelope. From the Navy, something about consultancy paperwork. He smiled. "That sounds like bureaucracy for thank you." She smirked. "Pretty much." Then her tone softened. "Will you come to our deployment send-off tomorrow?" He hesitated. "If I can." She studied his face, the tired eyes, the weight behind the stillness, and didn't press further. "Then we'll keep a seat for you," she said quietly. That night Robert sat by the bay again, staring at the dark water. The wind was cold, the kind that gets inside your bones. He coughed, the sound rougher than before, but ignored it. Instead, he pulled from his pocket a folded letter, the one he and Mitchell had started writing months ago. He unfolded it slowly. To the families of those who didn't come home, it began. "We never stopped carrying them, not for a day. The uniform may fade, but the duty doesn't, and neither does the love." He smiled faintly. The words finally felt complete. He set the letter down beside the metal. The reflection of both shimmered together in the dim light. The next morning, the phone rang again, Mitchell this time. "Senior Chief, you coming?" Robert looked out the window at the ships preparing to sail, their flags snapping in the wind. "Yeah," he said softly, "wouldn't miss it for the world." He hung up, straightened his jacket, and walked out into the sunlight, slower now, but steady. Because some calls you answer. Even when your body's tired. Even when your heart whispers that it's time to rest. Because service never truly ends. It just changes hands. The sky over Coronado was a flawless blue the morning of the send-off. Flags lined the pier. Families gathered in clusters, hands shielding their eyes from the glare off the ocean. The SEAL's transport helicopter waited on the tarmac, rotor blades idle, shimmering in the heat. Robert Chen arrived early. He parked at the far edge of the lot, close enough to hear the chatter but far enough to breathe before the crowd swallowed him. His steps were slower now, deliberate. Each one measured, like he was marching not toward an event, but toward an ending he'd already made peace with. The tremor in his hand had returned. He ignored it. He'd gotten good at pretending it wasn't there. From across the pier, Mitchell spotted him first. "Senior Chief." Robert lifted a hand in greeting. "Didn't think you'd notice an old ghost in the crowd." "Ghosts tend to stand out," Mitchell replied, smiling. Robert's eyes moved past him to Lieutenant Sarah Connors, standing tall near her crew, clipboard in hand, her voice crisp and clear as she ran the final checks. Even from a distance, Robert could see the quiet command in her posture. No panic, no bravado, just purpose. She caught his eye and offered a small nod, acknowledgement between soldiers who didn't need words. "Good turnout," Robert murmured. "Yeah," Mitchell said. "Team's nervous. Even if it's just a drill run overseas, it feels different this time." "First time always does," Robert said. Then, after a pause, "You ever think about how strange it is sending kids off to face the same storms we already survived?" Mitchell glanced at him. Maybe it's not strange, maybe it's trust. Robert smiled faintly, spoken like a man growing into his rank. The ceremony began shortly after. Families took their seats. The base commander gave a short speech about honor, discipline, and resilience. Words that sounded official but not hollow, though to Robert, the real meaning lived between the lines. He listened, eyes half on the sea, half on the faces of the young. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and jet fuel. He could almost hear echoes of other farewells, the voices of friends long gone, laughter before deployment, the weight of promises made in sand and blood. When the commander stepped aside, Sarah took the podium. Her voice carried effortlessly, steady but warm. "We train for worse days," she said, scanning her team. "We prepare for what we pray never comes, but readiness isn't about fear. It's about love for the person next to you, for the mission, for the oath we all took." She paused. That oath doesn't fade with rank or retirement. It lives as long as we remember what it meant. Robert felt his throat tighten. Mitchell leaned closer and whispered, "She learned that from you." Robert didn't answer, he couldn't. Sarah continued, "So when we lift off today, we don't just carry our orders. We carry everyone who taught us what courage looks like, even when it comes from someone sitting right here among us." She turned her gaze directly toward him. "Senior Chief Robert Chen, this team wouldn't be where it is without you." The audience turned. Applause swelled. Robert froze for half a second, then stood slowly, offering a small nod, humble, restrained, the only kind of recognition he ever allowed himself. Sarah smiled faintly, "And for that, sir, we thank you." After the ceremony, the team moved toward the helipad, strapping in, securing gear. Robert stood back, watching the way a teacher watches his students step into the world, proud and terrified in equal measure. Mitchell lingered beside him. "You okay?" Robert nodded, "Never better." It wasn't true. His vision had started to swim again. The sun felt sharper than usual, his breath shorter, but he stayed upright, jaw locked, refusing to show weakness. "Senior Chief," Sarah called from the ramp, "you coming up to see us off?" He shook his head. "I'll stay down here. Every flight needs someone watching from the ground." She smiled knowingly. "We'll bring your sky back in one piece." Robert smirked. "You better." The rotor blades began to spin. Wind kicked across the pier, flapping flags and tugging at his jacket. As the helicopter lifted, the sound thundered against his chest, familiar, almost holy. He saluted, slow and steady, his hand trembling against his forehead. Mitchell stood beside him, mirroring the gesture. The chopper rose higher, banking toward the horizon. The sound faded into the distance, replaced by waves crashing softly below. Robert lowered his hand and exhaled, still the best sound in the world. Mitchell glanced at him, something uneasy in his expression. "You sure you're feeling all right?" Robert smiled faintly. "Don't start mothering me, sailor, you're too young for that." But even as he joked, he felt the world tilt slightly. His knees buckled. "Senior Chief." Mitchell caught him before he hit the ground. Robert's breathing came shallow, fast. "I'm fine," he rasped, "just winded." "You're not fine," Mitchell said, panic breaking through the steadiness in his voice. "Sit down now." Robert sank to the ground, back against a crate. His skin had gone pale. Sweat rolled down his temple. "Jason," he said softly, "listen to me. Don't talk. Listen." Mitchell froze. Robert's eyes found his sharp, unwavering even through pain. "If this is the end, don't waste time feeling sorry for me. Just promise me you'll keep teaching them what matters." Mitchell's throat clenched. "Don't you dare talk like that." Robert chuckled weakly. "You sound like your father." Then do what he'd say. "Hold on." Robert looked up at the sky, the same sky he'd watched men disappear into his entire life. "Been holding on for 70 years, Jason. I think it's time I start letting go." Mitchell shook his head fiercely. No, not like this. Robert's hand trembled, then gripped Mitchell's forearm. The old strength still there, if only for a heartbeat. Tell them, he whispered, tell them I was proud, that every one of them carried the torch farther than I ever could. Stop, Mitchell pleaded. Robert smiled faintly, breath growing shallower. You did good, son, real good. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the pressure eased. His breathing steadied. He blinked. Mitchell let out a breath of relief. Jesus, you scared me. Robert gave a weak grin. Guess I'm still on duty after all. They got him to the base medical wing, despite his protests. The doctor confirmed mild cardiac stress, nothing fatal but a warning. You need rest, the doctor said firmly. Real rest. Robert nodded absently. Yeah, sure. Mitchell followed him outside. You'll take it easy, right? Robert smiled. Define easy. I'm serious, Senior Chief. So am I, Robert said. If the body's slowing down, fine, but the mission doesn't stop. Mitchell sighed. You don't have to prove anything. Robert's eyes softened. I'm not proving, I'm preparing. For what? For the moment I'm not here, and you still are. That night, Mitchell drove him home. The city glowed outside the truck window, streetlights reflected off the water, distant ships cutting lines of silver across the bay. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Robert said quietly, You remember what I told you at the hospital, about carrying the ghosts? Mitchell nodded. Yeah. Turns out, they get lighter when you start passing them on. He glanced out the window again, voice dropping. When I go, don't mourn me. Just do what we do best, take care of the living. Mitchell's jaw tightened. You're not going anywhere. Robert smiled faintly. Maybe not yet, but every sailor knows the tide doesn't ask permission to change. When they reached his house, Mitchell helped him out of the truck. The old man stood still for a moment, looking at the water. You ever wonder why the sea always calms you? He asked. Mitchell frowned. Why? Because it never forgets, Robert said softly. Every drop in that ocean has been part of a storm once, but it still finds its way back to peace. He clapped Mitchell on the shoulder. You'll find yours too. Then he turned toward the house, stepped slow but sure. As the door closed behind him, Mitchell stood in the driveway, watching the light fade from the windows. He knew what that walk meant. It wasn't goodbye, not yet, but it was close. And for the first time, he understood the quiet courage of men like Robert Chen, not the kind that charges into battle, but the kind that faces the sunset without flinching. That night, alone inside, Robert sat by the window, the same chair, the same view. His heart still ached, but his mind was clear. He reached for the folded letter on the table, to the families of those who didn't come home, and added one last line in his careful, steady hand. And when my time comes, don't cry for me. Just make sure the next one knows how to carry the light. He set the pen down, leaned back and closed his eyes. Outside, the waves kept moving. Always forward. Always homeward. When the call came, it was 4:17 a.m. Jason Mitchell was half awake, the remnants of a dream fading into the blue light of dawn. He recognized the number immediately, Naval Medical Center. He didn't answer right away. Some part of him already knew. He pressed the phone to his ear. Petty Officer Mitchell, a voice said softly. I'm sorry to inform you, Senior Chief Robert Chen passed away during the night. For a moment, everything went silent. The words hung in the air like the pause after a final heartbeat. The officer continued, something about cardiac arrest, peaceful, no suffering. Mitchell barely heard any of it. He just sat there in the dark, the phone still against his ear, his chest hollow. The man who'd saved his life, mentored him, shaped him, was gone. The funeral was 3 days later. San Diego's airfield chapel overflowed. SEALs, corpsmen, nurses, officers, Even civilians who had only known him through stories filled every pew. Outside, the ocean wind pushed at the flags until they stood stiff as iron. Mitchell wore his dress uniform, the challenge coin Robert had given him tucked in his pocket. He hadn't let it go once since that night at the hospital. At the front of the chapel rested a simple wooden casket draped in the Navy flag. No medals, no spotlight, just the insignia of a corpsman and a folded letter placed neatly on top. Mitchell had written it himself, finishing the one Robert started. To the families of those who didn't come home, it read, "Know that we carried their stories forward in every rescue, every oath, every moment we chose to serve instead of forget. Their courage didn't end with their last breath. It became ours." The chaplain spoke gently. He lived as he served with quiet honor, no fanfare, just purpose. When the service ended, Mitchell stepped forward. He laid his hand on the flag, whispering words only he and the old man would ever know. Then he turned to the crowd. "If anyone here ever doubted what a single person can do," he said, voice unsteady, "look at this room. One man, one life touched all of us. He didn't need medals to prove it. He proved it every time he showed up." He looked down at the casket again, jaw tight. "He told me once that service doesn't end, it just changes hands. So today, we take it from him, and we keep it moving." No one clapped, they didn't need to. The silence itself was the highest honor they could give. After the ceremony, the honor guard carried the casket to the pier. The sea was calm, almost unnaturally so. Mitchell stood at the edge, saluting as the bugler's notes floated over the water. When the final echo faded, he reached into his pocket, took out the challenge coin, and pressed it against the casket before it was lowered. "Fair winds and following seas, Senior Chief," he whispered. "You're relieved." That night, the team gathered at their usual bar, a quiet place near the base with worn wood tables and old photographs on the walls. Sarah Connors arrived last, her eyes rimmed with red, her posture still perfect. Mitchell raised his glass. "To Senior Chief Robert Chen, Doc, mentor, legend." They all lifted theirs. Sarah added softly, "To the kind of courage that doesn't shout." The clink of glasses was soft, almost a whisper. For a while no one spoke. They just sat there, surrounded by the low hum of conversation and the smell of salt drifting through the door. Then Sarah reached into her jacket pocket. "He left something for us." She slid an envelope across the table, addressed in Robert's unmistakable handwriting, "To the ones who keep watch after I'm gone." Mitchell unfolded it carefully. Inside was a single page. "You'll know when the next call comes. You always do. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for applause, just go." The oath wasn't a contract, it was a promise. "Keep it." Mitchell read the last line twice before his voice broke. Sarah rested a hand on his arm. "He knew we'd need this." He nodded. He always did. Weeks turned into months. The SEAL team completed their deployment, clean operation, no losses. When they returned to base, the first thing they did was visit Robert's old house. It sat quiet, curtains drawn, the faint smell of sea air still clinging to the porch. Inside, dust caught the sunlight in thin gold ribbons. His medal still hung above the table, the letter beside it. Mitchell walked to the window, staring out at the same view Robert used to watch every evening, the horizon glowing with late light. "Feels wrong," he murmured, "him not being here." Sarah stepped beside him. "He is here, you just can't see him anymore." Mitchell smiled faintly. "That's something your dad used to say." She shook her head. "No, that's something he taught me." They left the house as they found it, untouched, except for one thing. Mitchell placed a new note beside the medal. "We kept the promise." Months later, Mitchell stood once again at the airport, the same terminal where it all began. He was waiting for a connecting flight when he heard shouting near the security checkpoint. Instinct flared, old habits, old reflexes. A woman had collapsed, clutching her stomach, pale and gasping. The crowd froze just like before. Mitchell was moving before he even realized it. He dropped to his knees beside her, checked her pulse, and called out for help. His hands worked automatically, calm, precise, confident. A TSA guard started to say something, but stopped. The authority in Mitchell's voice left no room for doubt. When paramedics arrived minutes later, the woman was stable. Mitchell stood, brushing off his uniform pants. Someone in the crowd asked, "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "Just a medic, doing what I was trained to do." As he walked back to his seat, he caught a reflection in the terminal glass, sunlight glinting off his wrist. The challenge coin wasn't there anymore. He'd given it to the woman's husband before the ambulance left. "Keep it," he'd said. "It belongs to those who still have something to fight for." He sat down, breathing steady, heart calm. For a brief moment, he swore he felt someone standing beside him, a presence, quiet but unmistakable. Robert's voice echoed in his memory. "You never stop being what you were trained to be. You just wait for the moment when it matters again." Mitchell smiled. "Guess I'm still on duty, Senior Chief." That night he visited the pier. The sea was dark, stars scattered across it like medals no one had to wear. He took a small notebook from his pocket, the same kind Robert used to keep, and began to write. Rule 1. Always move toward the sound of trouble. Rule 2. Pressure stops bleeding faster than panic. Rule 3. Never forget who taught you Rule 1 and 2. He closed the notebook, tucking it inside his jacket. The tide rolled in, whispering softly against the wood. Somewhere out there in the endless dark, the echo of a corpsman's voice lingered, calm, steady, eternal. Because some heroes don't fade into history. They pass quietly through other people's hands, other hearts, until their lessons become instinct, their courage becomes routine, their name becomes something you don't have to say to feel. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And that's how legends live forever.